Hello everyone. Today we're going to think about osmoregulation, and that brings us to the collecting duct. So just a quick recap, we learned that the blood flows into the glomerulus here, and ultrafiltration forces things like small particles like glucose and amino acids, along with water and other salts into the Bowman's capsule. So the filtrate then flows down through the proximal convoluted tubule, and when it's passing through there, all of the glucose, all of the amino acids and some of the salts will get absorbed by selective reabsorption, active transport into these cells of the proximal convoluted tubule and then pass into the blood, and then that'll flow into the renal vein and out again. So all of the glucose and all of the amino acids will be retained, that it'll be reabsorbed back into the blood. So there shouldn't be any glucose or amino acids in the filtrate. In other words, there shouldn't be any of those substances in the urine either. When the glucose and the amino acids move out, that causes water to follow by osmosis. And actually, this is where most of the water is reabsorbed. People make the common mistake of saying that water is absorbed from the collecting duct, and that's where most of it happens, but that's wrong. We will learn that this is where it's regulated, and that yes, water is absorbed from here, but if you're asked where is most of the water reabsorbed, it's the proximal convoluted tubule. In the last video, we learnt how the loop of Henle created tissue in the medulla that was more and more concentrated in salt. And then we learnt that as the filtrate flows through the distal convoluted tubule, the pH is regulated, and some other toxins like creatinine get deposited or get put into the filtrate at this stage. So the filtrate finally enters the collecting duct, and as you can see there, numerous nephrons will feed in to the same collecting duct. And in the last video, we talked about the fact that the collecting duct is passing through the medulla, and as we've just said, as it passes through the medulla, it's passing through more and more and more concentrated interstitial fluid. The tissue is more and more concentrated in salt, and that will have the potential to draw water out by osmosis. So osmoregulation, we'll think about that in a minute. Just a question to get your brain working. How much urine do you think the average adult produces in a day? Between half and 1 litre, between 1 and 1.5 litres, 1.5 and 2.5, or more than 2.5 litres? Well, they say that the average adult produces somewhere between 1.5 and 2.5 litres of urine. Just to give you an idea, this jug here contains 1 litre, so you're producing more than that a day, maybe even more than 2.5 times that in a day. But it's not always the same. What does it depend on? It depends on how much we drink and maybe what activities we do and a few other things as well. So why is osmoregulation important? Well, as we said, it's controlling the level of water in your blood. That's what your textbook says. In your blood, you've got water and you've got salts dissolved in it. So it's really keeping those levels right. Or to put it in terms of water potential, it's keeping the water potential of your blood constant. And that means that you will also have a constant solute potential in your blood. Why is that important? Well, if you think about your blood as it flows through the capillaries, tissue fluid will leak out of your blood. And that tissue fluid is made up out of the plasma. So your plasma needs to have the right level of water, because that tissue fluid is going to bathe every cell in your body. And if that tissue fluid is too dilute, it means its water potential is too high and water's going to move into the cells and they're going to swell up. Or if your blood is too concentrated, that means that water is going to move out of your cells and into the tissue fluid because it's too concentrated. So it's really important that your body cells are bathed in the tissue fluid, that it has the right concentration. And in order for that to happen, the level of water and salts in your blood must be kept at that optimal level. Okay, there's a urine sample. I'm sure you've noticed that your urine is not always the same colour. And I found this chart on the internet, and it just gives you a rough idea of how hydrated you are. Hopefully you haven't seen anything that colour, but if you did, it means you need to get help, all right? So let's think about how your kidneys actually regulate the water level in your blood. And to do that, we're going to learn about a hormone, but to understand the hormone, we're going to learn a couple of new words here. So diuresis is a medical term, and it's used when someone is producing large volumes of dilute urine. So they're running to the toilet a lot and they're producing lots and lots of watery urine. Okay, sometimes if someone has high blood pressure, for example, their doctor might prescribe them diuretic tablets. And my aunt used to have to take these for her blood pressure, and she would call them her water tablets, and she would get up in the morning and take her tablets, and then she said, oh, I couldn't leave the house for an hour because I'd be having to run to the toilet all the time. Okay, so she had diuretic tablets. It made her run to the toilet because it made her produce large volumes of very watery urine. So antidiuretic is going to do the opposite. An antidiuretic is going to mean that there's going to be less urine produced, and it's going to be less watery. In other words, it's going to be more concentrated. So antidiuretic means less volume and more concentrated. So osmoregulation is controlled by a hormone called ADH, antidiuretic hormone. It's produced in the hypothalamus, which is this region of your brain, but it's then sent to be stored in the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. Now, don't worry, you don't need to learn this diagram. I'm just giving you an idea of where these glands are. So that's where it's produced, and you need to learn that it's made in the hypothalamus and that it's stored and later released from the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. So I was looking for a photograph of somebody exercising, so I thought, right, we're missing sports day, so I'll pluck a sports day photograph. And then when I saw it, I realised that, oh yes, it's your year group, and there's a few people there you might recognise. So exercise causes you to sweat, or if you eat a lot of food that's very salty, that will cause your blood to lose water from it as well. Or if you're not taking enough fluid in, all those things could lead to dehydration. I just like that photograph of the cats, and I thought, well, if you're lying out in the sun as well, you're going to sweat. So yeah, you're going to end up possibly getting dehydrated. Now, that means you're losing water from your blood and then you're sweating it from your skin. That means that your blood is going to become more concentrated, and as a result, the solute potential will fall, in other words, become more negative. Now, you have got special cells in the hypothalamus of your brain, and yes, that's the same place that makes this hormone, but those osmoreceptor cells will detect this drop in solute potential, and it sends impulses to the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, and that causes the pituitary gland to release more ADH than normal. Now, you know that hormones are made in glands and they're released into the blood, and they travel around the blood and then they affect a target organ. So the ADH is released by the pituitary gland and it enters the bloodstream. It travels all the way around the bloodstream, but it will affect the kidney, and specifically it will only affect this part here, the collecting duct. Now, if we look at a diagram of the collecting duct, so this is the lumen of the collecting duct. So you would have the filtrate coming from the distal convoluted tubule, flowing into the lumen, the gap in the middle of the collecting duct. It's lined by these cells, the epithelial cells here, either side, and we've just got a capillary drawn here. So if ADH is released, ADH will travel in the bloodstream and out in the tissue fluid, and then it will combine with special receptor cells on the cells lining the collecting duct. That causes this enzyme to be released. Now, you don't need to learn the name of the enzyme. That in turn causes these vesicles that have got aquaporins in them to fuse with the cell membrane, and basically the aquaporins then will open up. Now, if you think back to how things get transported in or out of cells, aquaporins are little channels that allow water to enter or to leave a cell. So essentially, the ADH has meant that these aquaporins have opened up. Now, if you think about the fluid here, this has a higher water potential. It's going to be closer to zero. This is going to be more negative in the blood because it has so many things that are dissolved there, glucose and amino acids and so on. So water will move by osmosis into the cells, and that will cause its water potential to become higher than here, and so water will then move by osmosis into the blood capillary. So if I think about it, the filtrate has travelled down here, the ADH has made the aquaporins open up, water has moved in by osmosis and been reabsorbed into the blood. So ADH means that water is reabsorbed into the blood. It's taken out of the filtrate, so that means there's going to be less filtrate left. Okay, and that means that the filtrate is actually going to be more concentrated. Okay, so we've got a few statements here. What you should do, pause the video and then on a scrap of paper work out what order you think they go in. So I'm going to let you pause the video until you've got an order written down, scribble down somewhere, and then we'll go through the answers, okay? Right, so hopefully you've written the answers down. What's the first thing that happens here? Well, statement number 3, the low water potential or the low solute potential is detected by the osmoreceptors, and they're in the hypothalamus. They will send message to the pituitary gland and get it to release more ADH than normal. And that's released into the capillaries and travels around the bloodstream, and it will affect the collecting duct cells. That causes the enzyme to be produced, but don't worry, you don't need to learn the name. And that causes the aquaporins in the cell membrane to open up, and as a result of that happening, then osmosis occurs. Osmosis, really, I should have written osmosis causes water to move down the water potential gradient out of the collecting duct. Where does it go to? It goes into the blood. So just to recap of what we've said, if you get dehydrated, and we talked about the ways that can happen, the solute potential of your blood is going to fall. The osmoreceptors detect that the solute potential has fallen, and that causes more ADH to be released by the pituitary gland. It enters the bloodstream, it reaches the collecting duct, and it makes the walls more permeable to water. And we talked about the aquaporins there. So more water moves by osmosis out of the collecting duct into the blood capillary. So what we said, more water is reabsorbed back into the blood, and that means that there's a smaller volume left of filtrate, and it's going to be more concentrated or hypertonic, and as a result, because that goes straight to the pelvis region, straight to the ureter, bladder, and out of the body through the urethra. So you're going to have less volume, but it's going to be more concentrated. Now, what do we mean about less volume and more concentrated? Well, here we go. Let's whiz this round. Camera skills are working well here. So, in my makeshift laboratory, I've got 3 glasses. I've tried to put roughly the same the same volume of orange juice. So if we have orange juice and say we normally produce, say there's normally that amount of water in the filtrate. Maybe if I put this up behind, that will help. Okay? We've been saying that, I'll tilt this round. Okay, so we said that maybe in this case, more water has been reabsorbed. So that means there's less water left in the collecting duct. So if there's less water left, most of the water has been reabsorbed, you've got a smaller volume, but you should see that it's more concentrated. It's maybe not that clear on this. Okay, if there was even less water reabsorbed, you would have a larger volume, but it would be more dilute. Okay, that's not terribly successful. It looks better in real life, but in camera it's not great. The whole idea I was trying to show was, if this is the normal volume of water in the filtrate, that's what it looks like. If there's less water, and that's because most of it has been reabsorbed, you get a very concentrated urine, but less of it. If there's very little water being reabsorbed, most of the water is left here, and so you get a larger volume, but it's less concentrated. Right, not the most successful of my experiments or demonstrations, but as I said, it looks better in real life. You just have to take my word for it. Okay. Hold on. So, what about the opposite? So you've probably noticed, maybe you're out at somebody's house and you're drinking lots of water or orange juice or something like that, Coca-Cola. Drinking large volumes of water, you normally end up having to go to the toilet a lot. So if you drink excessively, you can actually become overhydrated. So drinking too much water is going to dilute your blood. And so the salt potential of your blood this time is going to rise. It's going to get closer to 0. So yes, that's going to be detected by the osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus. They will send a message to the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, but this time less ADH is produced. So that means the collecting duct becomes less permeable to water. Now if I draw what we're talking about here, okay, so if I try and draw here, if we've got the collecting duct, we're saying less ADH, okay, that means that less water is going to move out. So most of the water stays in the filtrate and becomes the urine. If we put on the side here more ADH, you're going to have more water moving out, and so you're going to have less water left. So getting back to being overhydrated, we said the salt potential of your blood rises because of all this extra water going into the blood. There's less ADH produced. That means there's less aquaporins, less water moves out of here. That means most of the water is going to be excreted in the urine. So this is the overhydration when you drink too much. Now, while I was doing that, I hit a few buttons, and I'm going to need a minute or two, a few seconds here, just to get back to where I was. Okay, I think we're ready to go here. So, as we said, less ADH, collecting duct is less permeable, less water is reabsorbed, stays in the collecting duct, produces more urine, same amount of salt and so on, but more water, so the urine is going to be hypotonic, more dilute. Okay, osmoregulation is an example of negative feedback. Now, I'm sure you probably can't read that too well, the type is pretty small, and so that's why I've told you to download a copy of it and you can have a look at it. But if I take you through it, if you look at your own copy, what we've just said is you've been drinking a lot of water. So if you drink a lot of water, that, in fact, you could write that on your diagram. So drinking large quantities of water is going to cause the water potential of your blood. Now, up until now, we've been talking about solute potential, but the two things are basically going to work in the same way, because as you know from osmosis, water potential is solute potential plus pressure potential. And we're talking about liquids here, we're not talking about cells. So if the water potential is rising, that's because the solute potential is rising. So drink lots of fluid, water potential rises, osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus detect it, less ADH is released from the pituitary gland, collecting duct walls become less permeable, so that means less water is reabsorbed, and therefore more water remains in the filtrate, so you produce a larger quantity of urine, but it's actually less concentrated. Now, what's happening to the blood? The blood was too dilute at the beginning. The water potential was too high, but very little water is being reabsorbed. Most of the water is being lost in the urine, and so the water potential is actually going to drop. On the other hand, what we started off thinking about was you're lying outside, a hot sunny day, you're sweating, or you're running 1,500 metres in sports day, or you've eaten a very salty meal, something like that. Your water potential or the solute potential of your blood's going to drop. Again, hypothalamus detects it by the osmoreceptors. More ADH is released. It makes the collecting duct walls more permeable, so more water leaves the collecting duct and gets reabsorbed back into the blood. So if more water goes into the blood, it means the water potential is going to rise back to what it should be, back to normal. As a result, less water in the urine, so you've got a smaller volume of urine, but it's more concentrated. Okay, finally, just to finish off, I want to get you thinking. So alcohol, coffee are two examples of things that are known to be diuretics. Now, way back at the beginning, we talked about what diuretics do. And we're reading here that alcohol and coffee inhibit the production of ADH. So what I want you to do is to write we'll really just answer the question that I've put in this assignment. It's only for 2 or 3 marks. How would drinking alcohol or coffee affect someone's urine production if they've been drinking a lot? Okay, so if they're drinking a lot of urine or coffee, deliberate mistake, they're not going to be drinking urine. If they've been drinking a lot of alcohol or drinking a lot of coffee, how's their production of urine going to be affected, and why? I want you to use some of the words that we've talked about today. Use the biological terms, all right? So just a few lines, put it on the assignment, and I'll read through it. Okay, thank you very much.